What's up, everyone? Welcome to another exciting episode of Acceptable Accuracy with Tyler and Philip. I am your co host, Tyler.
And I am your other co-host, call sign Silver.
What? Where?
Yeah, bro.
What do you mean by silver?
Okay, so
You are such a boomer.
in video games, you have like your handle. My handle has always been Silver. So when I was thinking about this episode and joining in and setting my name inside of our podcasting tool, it's call sign Silver.
The irony is, I can't even see it. All I see is call sig.
Don't call them unless if you've dropped their gun. Maybe you want to.
No,
If you hover over the
there
name,
you go.
it's right off the bat. We are like at the time of recording, we are in the throes of the 6-hour social media manager absolutely like lying through their teeth about their drop safety pistols.
Mm-hmm. But
So,
Sig,
or
if you
drop
want to
safe
sponsor
pistols.
us, we will take it.
Yeah, 6-hour, please sponsor us.
I will take it. Sig, Smith and Wesson, Glock, Shadow Systems, please. Any of you. HK, why not?
What
Walther,
about what about High Point?
I'll take Hollison.
You don't want
But either way,
you want
so
High Point?
welcome. The Yeet Cannon.
I want the one that's wrapped or Cerakoted in the dollar bills or
Oh
the
my
$100
goodness.
bills. It's my
I don't
problem
even.
solver. My Glock Bowdy.
That's, I want to. I want to. Was it a Block 19? That's what I want.
Yes. They got sued so hard by both Glock
Uh,
and Lego. It was fantastic.
I know.
I know
I
somebody that
know.
owns one.
Or the Chick-fil-A AR-15. I'll take that, where it says like "My Pleasure" on it.
Chick-fil-A mags. I know somebody can make them for us. So
Mm-hmm.
hit
Yeah,
me up after this
but
episode.
either way, seriously, everyone, thank you for listening to another episode. We already just had a 2-minute fun rant, but seriously, welcome to another fun episode. We are doing part 2 of our civilian radio and communications, and we actually have our returning guest, Andrew. If you want to go ahead and say hi.
Well, howdy, howdy, guys. Andrew, Kilo Delta AT, Uniform Charlie Mike.
I was really hoping we were going to get your like video game handle. I'm a little disappointed here. Obviously, using your handle for
Well,
amateur
But your
radio makes a
handle
little more
straight
sense.
up was silver.
Yeah, bro.
How did you get that? How did no one else have that? Or how
Okay,
old are
so
you?
like, okay,
mine's Hyper Knight.
like NIGHT or KNIGHT?
KN, come on.
I was thinking like Hyper Night, like you had too much Red Bull before going to bed, and you're like, I'm just gonna game all night.
Oh my
You know it.
goodness.
No, the first computer we bought was a floor model, and the password was like Silversmith 5231 or something like that. So I went by Silversmith for a while and eventually shortened it to just Silver because everybody's got to have a handle. I had a buddy who had a handle Wavetable, another one that was Spectrum. I can remember those. It's good times, man. It's good times.
Oh, that was back in the 80s when days were good.
It was 90s, but that's cool too. I only say that because I didn't have a computer until like the late 90s. That was not cool.
I was about to say, I wasn't even born until the mid 90s.
You don't even know what a CRT monitor is, do you?
What is that?
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
They're backbreakers. That's what they are.
I'm looking it up right now. CRT monitor.
Yeah. And while you're looking at that, so this episode is going to
Oh,
be.
that's what those are called?
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, I know. What
Cathode
those are.
ray tube, I believe, is what it stands for. Is that correct, Andrew? Does that sound right?
Yes, that does sound
Nice.
right.
In IT, we love our acronyms.
The Navy loves them even more.
Oh,
The Navy
so
even has a book.
Nice.
Well, the Navy even has a book. You want to venture a guess as to what its name is?
Please tell me that it has an acronym for the name.
TBOA.
There you go.
The
Look
book
at
of
that.
acronyms.
Knew it.
Oh my goodness.
I said that right for you, Tyler.
Thank you for that. Well, but either way, so once again, we are in part 2. So in our last episode, we went ahead and spoke about the different types of radios, or I guess, how would you describe that? Of course, we were kind of breaking down FRS, GRMRS, and amateur. Like, how would you describe that would be like different frequency types or different types of radios.
Yeah, different, let's call it feature sets. So
Thank you. I
different
appreciate that.
radios can be locked in or not locked into different feature sets, different channels, different capabilities.
I
Gotcha.
had a I had a question after the last episode that because we were talking about the different radios that you can purchase, right? You can get your FRS radio, your GMRS, and your ham radio.
Yeah.
Is there a radio that can do like all three or like two of the three that is like properly licensed? I mean, yes, I know they can do them, but are they properly licensed by the FCC to do so?
So little bit yes and no. So we'll start with the FRS requirements from the FCCs. The radio police require that your FRS, Family Mobile Radio Service, which has the least amount of power, have a fixed antenna. So that's why you see a lot of those radios with like these tiny little short and stubby antennas. Um, but when you bump up the power to GMRS and ham radio, you gotta have more power. And that's kind of the aim of the game. And with that, you need a better antenna uh, to go with it. So, in all technicality, if you have a Boofwang UV5R, and yes, I make fun of it, but it's great. If you have a Bofang UV5R, that radio is capable of doing FRS and GMRS at the power requirements that those radios require. However, it doesn't have a fixed antenna. And the other fact of the matter is, it can do more power than either one of those really require. So, um, technically, according to the law of the land, the answer is no. Um, in practice and logically, the answer is yes.
What if I plastic weld the antenna to my Baofeng?
Good question. I'm gonna have to consult the AIs and interwebs on that one.
Or what if
That's
you're a
amazing.
church safety team that has FRS radios, but a bunch of the antennas have broken off?
Oh
What?
man.
That has not happened to any
I
church that
I
I know
know
of.
I know no church
So
that has that problem.
that sounds like the section coming up here that we're going to do on radio in real life.
Fair enough. That's funny. No, good. Thanks for clearing that up because it was just something I was on my mind after the last episode. I was like, I've got a radio. I think my TID radio is like certified for GMRS and uh, ham radio.
Yep, that is pretty common these days.
Yeah, I kind of figured. No, that's cool. So I think if you're looking for a radio that can do GMRS, you might as well look for one that can also hit up the amateur radio frequencies as well.
Oh, 100%.
What, like they said, this old house. Why not? It's a
Indeed.
it's an old reference. If anybody got that out there, please send me an email and maybe I'll send you a Velcro patch or something. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to discuss that was as I was thinking about this set of episodes and talking about radios for civilians, there's a lot of resources out there of like how to get your license and like the things that you're supposed to do when you're like using a radio. But I wanted to cover, and I wanted to do it early in the episode, as we are almost 10 minutes in, and talk about radio etiquette, like the proper way of using the radio, like whether it's FRS, are there any rules? Who knows? GMRS or like ham radio. Like if you're gonna queue up or you're gonna speak over the radio waves, my assumption is that there is a proper way to do so.
If you're going to push that push to talk button and go hot, you betcha. What a great question. Let me get into this. We're going to go a little bit into the histories here, and talk about how we did things in ham radio so that you kind of get an idea. And we joked about it at the top of the hour with this podcast, but it really applies. We joked about the Navy having TBOA, the Book of Acronyms, and stuff like that. But that is where ham radio really came from as well, because what we did to communicate with ham radio was we strung a wire between point A to point B, and then we did Morse code over that wire. And then some really smart people figured out how to get rid of the wire, and we kept doing Morse code over the radio. So we did Morse code over the airwaves. Well, if you think about the phrase, how are you, or who are you, or things like that, that takes a lot to do. Da 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 da. The dits and dashes take a while, and then you actually have to have people who think in dots and dashes in order to translate that. So after a very short amount of time, the ham radio operators really got fed up with that, and they made these QSO, or Q codes, if you will. So they came up with those Q codes, and then now here we are looking at it in 2025 going, holy smokes, this stuff looks a little complicated. So we came from Q codes because we're doing Morse code all the time. However, nowadays we're doing everything over voice. So if you want to reach out, there's kind of two levels of doing so. If you have FRS, there are no hard requirements on FRS. You can push that push talk button, go hot, and say whatever you would like to say. That also goes for citizen band CB radios. You can hit that push to talk and go hot. Um, that's why a lot of your ham radio and GMRS radio operators will kind of be like, ugh, FRS, ugh, CB, yeah. Um, CB is the redheaded stepchild of radio, so uh, a lot of people try to get off of that. But if you're using GMRS or ham radio, there is kind of a way we do it. So with GMRS and with ham radio, you do get a call sign. Phil, do you know what your call sign is?
I was hoping you were going to ask because I can't remember what it is. And because I got it a while ago and I was like, I should probably like remember what this is and look it up and then I can use it after we do this episode. And I was actually trying to find the database to look myself up because I couldn't find anything in the emails that came from the federal government that included it. And I was like, dude, I don't know what this
Right.
is. And apparently I never wrote it down, which is super embarrassing because I'm always I'm pretty on top of this kind of stuff.
Well, so
I'm
you
gonna look it up.
illuminated a problem that exists within the radio space is when you get that GMRS license, GMRS is the step between FRS and CB and ham radio. So if you're over in the ham radio space, that's pretty qualified, let's put it that way. But GMRS is kind of like, well, if I just throw a radio to Uncle Phil and say, hey, hit me up when you're done deer hunting and we'll come get you from the blind, you're not going to be like, oh, by the way, here's my call sign. I'm going to look at you and give you the side eye and go, really? I'm not doing that. So, so technically speaking, for both GMRS and ham radio, we're supposed to throw out our call sign. So I'm going to give you a conversation and I'm going to build on it in little pieces here. So we use the NATO phonetic alphabet for call signs, but we speak English as well. So this goes across the board for speak English. If you're doing it locally, as well as around the world, the universal language of radio is English. So that is actually something that's specified. So let's start with call sign, and we'll use mine. And I have a ham radio call sign, which brings out the next rule is use the highest call sign that you have. So I have a GMRS call sign, but I also have a ham radio call sign. So my ham radio call sign is Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, and that is in the NATO phonetic. So you start with your call sign, and then um, you want to say, "Hey, is Kilo Delta 8 India Romeo Golf out there in the universe? Fred, are you out there?" So you can build upon that, or you can still use those old Q codes. So most of the time when I queue up on a radio, I'm Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, calling CQ, CQ, CQ. Anybody out there on the radio waves? This is Andrew, Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, standing by. That tells a lot of people that, hey, I'm just here for the fun of it. I'm here to chat and I'm trying to do something. Or you could say, Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, this is Andrew. I'm testing on a radio. Anybody out there to give me a report? How do I sound? Something like that. So that's how you would normally start it. Now, on the GMRS, technically, we're supposed to throw out our call sign as well. So it does not matter whether you have a little voice throwing out a call sign, your voice throwing out your call sign, or your wife's voice throwing out your call sign. That's all just fine and well. So when you have somebody on the hook, though, and somebody comes back and says, Kilo Delta 8, Uniform Charlie Mike, or Kilo Delta 8, hey, I didn't get the last three, but hey, I hear you. Are you out there? Then you can kind of go back and forth a little bit. Tyler, did you have something there?
No, sorry, I just had a
Oh,
tickle in my throat.
oh, you're good. So you can go back and forth, but remember again here. I'm gonna reference that history of radio, which is we want to kind of keep our communications short and sweet. So what are the things that radio guys talk about? Well, we talk about our radios.
Nerd alert.
Yes, very definitely.
To
You-
be fair, I build with Lego, so I can't really call anybody else a nerd.
we embrace it over here in the radio space. So let me build on a conversation here. So Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike. This is Andrew standing by on channel X, Y, or Z. I'm using a Motorola SL300 operating at 1 watt of power. I am looking for someone who can hear me 4x4. And then usually we devolve into something about the weather.
So you're looking for somebody in an all-wheel drive vehicle.
Yeah.
I know that I've heard the 4x4 before. I joke, but like, what does that mean?
Yes. Yes. So that is a signal report. So again, we're going to take this back to the history of this is Morse code, and we want to keep this super short and sweet. So, you know, I'm going to compare and contrast. 4x4 is I can read you with no difficulty, and you have a fair signal. So put that all together. Read you with no difficulty and a fair signal. Now, let's put that in a Morse code, and even the old guys are going to say, "Screw you." I'm not doing it.
Sure.
So you can look up ham radio signal reports. Not everybody does them anymore because radios have gotten very, very good. But they do come up when you start talking to people further away. So when you're going into the serious side of ham radio and you're trying to make contacts over the USA or over the pond to Europe, or even farther than that around the world, then you start getting pretty serious about the signal reports so that people understand how well they're doing in certain parts of the world.
Interesting.
Yes.
That clears things up a little bit. Again, because I guess, like you said, they'll come back to Morse code, which I appreciate that you opened up with that, because then it puts some context behind things for other people. Like,
Yeah.
why are there these like these shortcuts, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
and we do the same thing in IT, right? Like, and there's
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of that leftover legacy stuff left over from like when the internet was just a young little puppy.
Yes.
But okay, so that's cool. So another question I had about the call signs, you mentioned that you use your highest level call sign. So if you're using GMRS, are you using your Kilo Delta?
No.
No. So you're
Well,
using your
I'm no, I'm sorry. When I'm using GMRS, I am using my ham radio, which is Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike.
yeah. Okay, but you also have a GMRS like hand like a call sign, but you're not using that though.
Correct. So you use the highest call sign that you have. So
Interesting.
um, I have a technician class license, just a very low level one, but I also hold other licenses in FCC for longer range communication with satellite uh, stuff. And so whenever you're on satellites, you would use your satellite. However, in the ham radio space and the GMRS space, let's say you had an extra class license, so N30C um, is one of the extras that I talk with all the time. And when someone throws out a N series call sign, you're like, holy smokes, this dude knows what he's talking about,
Mm,
because all the N series call signs are extra class.
nice.
So it's a way to kind of tell people where you're at on the spectrum of nerd alert as well. Um, but
It's like
in ham,
it's like a nerd hierarchy.
yeah, a little bit. But to be honest with you, most of the time I go hunting for those people because I love to ask them questions, and they're just a wealth of knowledge. Man, you're gonna have a hard time shutting these people off if you ask a question that they're passionate about.
That's fair. It's just like it with any hobby, right? You're going to get those experts, and at least it's nice because
Oh,
you can
for sure.
identify those who are advanced in that
Yes.
area.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
one thing I thought was interesting. So I did find my call sign, by the way.
Oh, excellent.
Um, I used the search feature and it found it. So anyway, so
Congratulations.
you know,
With
but
a nice
it
address
wasn't
too,
working
right,
on my
Phil?
phone. Yeah, yeah, it does not have my address on it. So you can look me up all you want, but it's not my address. It's an address I used though. Let's put it that
Yep.
way. Anyway, so
It is a true
um,
address.
it is a true address. It is one I use. Okay, so the other thing I found was interesting this may slight segue us, but with so yours starts with like a K or kilo.
Yep.
Mine is a W or whiskey. Is the kilo unique to uh, ham, or can you also get like a is like the whiskey ones, are those unique to GMRS?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Those are unique to GMRS. And for the ham radio stuff, the technician class, the Kilo Delta 8, the first three characters of that designate the grid square that your address resides in.
Oh, fancy. Does it do the same thing
Yes.
for a GMRS as well?
It does not.
Okay, I
Those
didn't think
are
so because
those are
it's
more
like family.
randomized.
Yeah, it's like family license, so
Yep.
your
Yep.
family could live anywhere in theory.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you moved, you have to get a new one.
No. So if you move, you have to change your address, but the call sign is issued from the originating address. So
Gotcha.
whatever you start with is what you get.
Okay, that makes sense. And the only other reason I asked about the W and the K, or whiskey and kilo difference, is because if you like all of our TV stations in Michigan are start with a W and then they're all start with a K on like the West Coast, and I think is that divided by
Yes.
the Mississippi, I think, or something like that.
Yes. Yep.
But I wasn't sure if that something like that applied. Obviously, I have one that starts with a W, so it would make no sense. But I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah. all sorts of the FCCs. There are a lot of rules and
they love their
regs.
whiskeys and their kilos, which I mean, I can
Yeah, they
rabbit hole
do.
on that too. I think of like a prohibition with their like radio. I guess.
Oh man,
Anyway,
yes.
so but I'm gonna get myself back on track though. So going back to radio etiquette, because I kind of sidetracked us a bit. What else like would somebody need to know when using the public airwaves that are just general good ideas to keep in mind?
Yes. So, um, uh, you have to remember as well as we go back into the histories, we came from Morse code, we morphed into a voice world, and then we morphed into a voiced hobbyist world. And a lot of the voice hobbyists love to yak. They will yak your ear off, because sometimes this is people's passion, this is people's hobby, and they will just yak their brains out. Most of the people like us are there for pretty what I would call tactical communications, like, hey, I'm testing a new radio, can anybody hear me? Did I program it right? Did I do it right? Am I pushing the right button? So you'd have more tactical communications, and so you want to be very um, specific in your communications. So Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, calling CQ, CQ, CQ. Is there anybody out there on channel X? I am standing by with a new radio and would love a signal report. So you're being very specific. So then when somebody comes back to you and says, hey, Kilo Date Uniform Charlie Mike, I think I hear you. Yep, I do. I got you. Signal report is good. I can hear you. Thanks for the call. Great. Thanks so and so for the call. I really appreciate it. Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike standing by. Yeah, so it's very deliberate communication, and you refer to your call sign quite often so that um, you can differentiate yourself from other people who are in the space.
Gotcha. Are there any requirements that you have to? Because obviously, when you like you showed us earlier or demonstrated earlier, you use your like call sign to start the call. Are there any requirements that they have to continually use that?
Yes, there is. So you at least have to throw it out once every 10 minutes.
That's for GMRS and for ham license as well.
That is correct for both
Okay,
of them.
well, it's nice they standardized.
Yes. So you have to throw it out after or every 10 minutes. And then you do have to throw it out whenever you want to change channels or end communication with someone.
Oh,
So Kilo Delta 8 Uniform Charlie Mike, this is Andrew signing off 7-3s, which is thank you for the communication and have a great day, all in one. 7-3. Don't ask me on that one. I really don't even know after being in radio for 20 plus years. But be very specific and use your call sign whenever you can.
huh. No, that's extremely helpful. Now, the last question I have to kind of round out the radio etiquette part of things. Do you have a great resource for somebody that they could reference? Like, let's say I want to get on radio for the first time, and I'm a
Yes.
little nervous because I don't really want to mess up and say the wrong thing, right?
Yeah,
So, is
absolutely.
there like I looked a little bit, and maybe I didn't look hard enough, and my Google Foo was not on for that day, but is there a good resource like a website or something like that that somebody could reference, like maybe print out or at least have in front of them when they're queuing for the first time?
Absolutely. So, your first conversation, there's a WikiHow article out there, and it's called Call CQ on Amateur Radio. And this is a great article of just step 1, 2, 3, how to throw out your call sign, how to call CQ, which is, hey, is there anybody out there calling anyone out there? How much time do you got to wait? How much, all of a sudden, what if you get someone on the hook and they're like, well, hey, I hear you. You're like, holy crap, I'm a dog with a tire. What do I do now? So Look for the wikihow.com article called Call CQ on Amateur Radio.
That's awesome. I appreciate that because like I had a hard time finding anything that was like truly
Oh,
useful
yes.
that wasn't going to take you down the rabbit hole of everything about radios. No, I just want a reference for having a conversation.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
no, that's cool. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you giving the like verbal examples as well too, so that somebody can kind of understand what it should sound like, right? From
Yeah.
somebody who has experience. And then the
Yep.
whys behind it as well, I think are very important because somebody's gonna hear all that and be like, I have no idea why he's saying CQ, CQ,
Bingo.
or 4x4
Bingo.
or all-wheel
Yes.
drive, all that kind of stuff. So
Yep.
thank you.
Absolutely.
So kind of jumping topics here real quick. We talked a lot about analog radio.
Yes.
And obviously, we live in very much a digital world.
Indeed, we do.
So I kind of feel like there must be some modernization towards digital radio. Is that even a thing?
Mm-hmm.
And
It's a
like,
big thing.
okay, so what is it?
So, great question. Digital radio. Again, let's go into the histories and talk about this. So, a single analog channel can take up 24 kilohertz of space in the radio waves. So, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive here. But back in the heyday of radio, things got a little crowded. Um, Everybody and their brother wanted radios. So, what happened was Motorola came up with a tier system. And so, what you could do is you could tier a 24 kilohertz analog channel. Now, this is the exact same thing that we did with our modems. So, if we remember back in the dial up days, and Tyler, I'm sorry that we're leaving you on this one.
Bro,
Uh,
I don't even know what dial up is.
Oh
I
my
know.
gosh.
I know. uh, but if you ever remember back in the days when we used to do dial up, AOL dial up, and you heard the modem tones and the squeaking and squealing and beeping and bopping around after we dialed the number, that
What
is
is
essentially what we're doing
dial
with that.
up? I'm dead serious. I'm literally looking it up like, what
I was
is
getting a
dial
whole
up?
history lesson about not only radio, but
Yes.
network communications.
Huh.
So So let's go back to that Motorola Tier 2 radios. So Moto Turbo was the original name that this came up with. And Motorola sold so many radios with Moto Turbo because what do you have in every county? You have police and you have fire. So instead of having police and fire apply for two business grade emergency licenses, which could cost $50,000 to $100,000 a year to hold those licenses,
Dang.
Motorola said, hey, if you get a Moto Turbo system, you only need to apply for one license. So now you can split that in half, and the police guys can have half of the channel, and the fire guys can have half the channel. And then we're going to take this one step further, and we're going to carve out just a little bit more of that channel, and we're going to put GPS units in these radios, and then we're going to send that GPS frequency to the tower where the police and fire radio is being served from so that you can tell where all these guys are. So that came about in your late 80s, early 90s, and that just went gangbusters. Well, fast forward to today, and everybody wants a digital mode. So nowadays, Yaesu has a digital mode. ICOM has a digital mode. There's an open source digital mode called DMR. Um, Yaesu's Yaesu System Fusion. ICOM is D Star. So essentially all of these digital modes want to do one thing. They want to get that audio channel down so they can add in a data channel. So if you queue up on an FRS radio and you have someone on another FRS radio and they hear you talking, there's no mechanisms on those radios to say, oh, hey, Phil just hit the push to talk button and now mom is pushing the push to talk button. There's no mechanisms for that in the analog world. However, over in the digital world, if I press the push to talk, it's going to throw my call sign, and everybody who's on the same digital channel now sees my call sign and sees my
Hmm.
name next to it. And then for our team awareness, what I call team awareness is you can also transmit your location. So that really bumps us into that digital age.
Interesting, because I feel like
Yes.
I had okay, so I had some confusion in this, which is why I wanted to talk about it.
Yes.
Because obviously the prevalence of analog radios, there's a lot of them, right?
Yes.
Like, and fairly cheap as well too. But it sounds like there's almost some like there's not like a specific standard for digital radio. That's kind of a pain in the butt. Number one,
Yep.
and then for some reason I was like, you can't send digital information over radio waves, but apparently you can. I mean, I
Yeah.
physically know you can because that's how wireless works, right? But
And,
like,
yep. But
but
I'm
I thought there was
I'm
like rules against it from the FCC of using like amateur radio,
well,
GMRS, whatever, to send
like
digital.
let me cue you in on probably where the light bulb moment's going to happen, and that's
Yeah,
going to
let's unpack
segue.
that.
That's going to segue us into the next topic, which is going to be encryption.
Let's
So,
go.
um, let's go back into the history. Where did we start? We started with Morse code. That's your, for lack of a better term, and to associate with all the kids these days, that's the OG data, right?
It's fair. Ones and zeros. Yep.
Ones and zeros, right? So if it's not encrypted, we can totally send data over a radio channel. So if it's just my call sign in plain text, perfect, no problem. So now this jumps us into a whole nother category, which is I'm going to touch on it in two parts. A lot of your high frequency, which is your long range, multi continent, around the world communications, where a lot of that happens, they rely on digital modes very heavily. And digital modes don't take a whole lot of power to transmit beeps and uh, beeps and bops, dots and dashes, modem tones, because it emulates more of an on off versus if I were to talk trying to get my voice around the world, you may have a talker like me who has a pretty steady voice or a pretty inflected voice, or you may also have someone who's, hi, this is Kilo Delta 8, Uniform Charlie Mike. Can anybody hear me? No, we can't even hear you because half the people that you're talking to are deaf and can't hear the mumbling that you just did. So JS8 call is a huge one. RTTY RTTY is also a huge digital mode. Radio teletype was the next version from Morse code that we did. So there's a lot of digital modes that do not do encryption, which is why we can send information over the radio waves.
What if I came up with my own encoding though? Right. I'm not
Yes.
encrypting it, but it's
Yep.
encoded, and I have created the Philip protocol.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I encode my data with that. Technically I'm not encrypting it because
Correct.
I'm not sharing. I don't need a key from end to end. So somebody else has the same Philip code. They could hear me,
Right.
right?
So the way that the FCC defines that is if um, it if you post your modulation method on the internet, because invariably, if you're the only one using your method, it's not going to get very far. So if you want others to use your method, you're going to have to publicize it. So the FCC says you're in the clear if you publicize your method.
Interesting. Into what though? Like, I'm gonna publicize it on the dark web.
That gets into the gray matter. But again, we want to reference that ham radio is there for us to experiment with.
Sure.
The
Interesting. Okay.
FCC wants to keep it open for folks to do that. They're not sitting there like a nun with a ruler going, "Ooh, you misbehaved and I get to smack your hands." Um, they're specifically wanting you to have the space that you need in order to um, do the experimentation necessary. So fun little side story on this. About 3 4 years ago, all the tornado warning sirens went off in Texas, Dallas, Texas. And that caused quite a consternation because tornado sirens operate on a specific frequency. If one goes off, they all go off because they not only hear the frequency and the code, quote unquote, given to them. It's like if you've ever listened to yourself dialing a phone number, it sounds like that. Um, but they also transmit it out so that you can get from one side of Dallas to the other without a huge, massive infrastructure.
My
Well,
guess is that was not encrypted.
that was not encrypted.
Okay. And
You are
somebody found it.
correct.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
somebody, a smart kid, found it. And so now that's open to the entire rest of the world
Oops.
to do that same kind of thing. So you can transmit data. And 3 years ago, it was also opened up on all the GMRS frequencies that you can also transmit data. So
Oh.
that's why you have radios like the BTEC UV Pro
Yeah.
touting that you can do voice over a frequency and talk to everybody else. And then anybody else who has a BTEC UV Pro can digitalize that channel and send a little bit of data, like your location, over it. And
Hmm.
that's totally cool to do.
Can I send animated gifs to Tyler?
Oh man, now we got to upgrade back into ham radio.
There's not a bandwidth for that business.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I guess, my next question too, is sending data over radio frequencies, which it sounds like
Yes.
you can.
Yes.
Now, is there? I assume there's got to be like a rule somewhere that says I cannot transmit data over primary channels that are used for talking.
100%. So
Okay.
if you look at the amateur bland, amateur band plan, the U.S. amateur radio bands. This is put out by the ARRL, Amateur Relay Radio League. That's the official civilian organization that helps the FCC take care of everything. The FCC says, all right, so you can transmit on these bands and you can do this and that and the other thing, but if you want to do data, you do it over here on these bands. And if you want to do voice, you do them over here on these bands. So they have everything split up quite well. But you mentioned wanting to send a meme. Well, a meme is a lot of data, animated, GIF, however you want to say that. Um, that's a lot of data to be sending over these bands. And here's one thing that I want to point out: UHF and VHF. We're talking 400 megahertz. Our Wi-Fi that we deal with is operating on 2.4 to 5 gigahertz. So there's quite a massive jump. And there's a reason why we operate in those spectrums. It's in order that we can push as much data through radio waves as we possibly can, because we're a data hungry civilization at this point. So trying to push that amount of stuff would be, trying to download pictures over a dial-up modem. That's kind of how to think about that best.
Yeah, I understand that. Actually, I kind of knew that was the case. That sending data over radio, especially long distance, is not going to produce a lot of bandwidth, right? So, to
Correct.
your point about like comparing a slow internet connection to a fast internet connection, radio would be very slow.
Yes.
The reason I kind of brought this up was because obviously the radio, people that view it typically understand it from more of an analog voice perspective, right? But there are other things you can do with it as well, and there is a future to what radio looks like. And ATAC, I know, is one of those things, or whatever they're calling the civilian version of ATAC these days. I think it's
Yep.
still ATAC,
It's
right?
ATAC.
Okay. And that's something that like we probably won't hit on much this episode. Maybe a future episode we can do.
Yeah.
But you like the whole concept of like sending information to somebody, like your location, which you brought up quite a bit. That can be sent over ATAC. Maybe some other data could be sent over radio. And it's kind of up to, like you said, the experimental side of radio. It's up to us to figure out what really is needed and useful for that. Like you could text message, I assume, because it's a small amount of data, right?
Oh
Over
yeah.
radio, right? So if you couldn't voice communicate, you can still send a text message.
Oh yeah.
It's just a matter of the standardizations from what you're saying, though, are not necessarily out there because a lot of companies are doing their own thing, which is
Yes.
unfortunate. And it's not like
Yes.
IT world where pretty much everything can talk to everything else because we're using the IP stack, right?
Correct.
So for the most part, not for everything. Thanks,
Yes.
NVIDIA. But that is another conversation.
Oh
Anyway,
boy.
so yeah, it's just unfortunate that there hasn't been like a standard. And I think you did say earlier that there was like a open kind of standard available, but it doesn't sound like it's used as much.
So it is probably used the most out of
Oh,
all
no
the
kidding.
digital
Okay, well that's
standards.
good to hear then.
So let me just break that down here for just a minute. So when we're talking about the digital standards, again, let's go back to the sheer and simple fact of what Motorola did with it. It said, okay, you can do voice on this half of the channel, you can do voice on the other half of the channel, and we carve out just a little bit for data so that we can send some kind of critical information over it. So that's exactly what all of these are doing. But let me break it down. So ICOM was the first one to come out with an amateur radio digital mode. Sorry, um, brain lapse there. So with that, and let's reference what I said about the ICOM radios last time. ICOM was also the first one to introduce GPS to the radios. But with that, ICOM kind of came about having GPS on radios in a little different way, which was okay, now we're just going to download the entire database of the entirety of the US repeater book to the radio. And this was way before a repeater book even existed. Repeater book came out of and was born out of the fact that ICOM had a database of all of these repeaters over the whole US and European and other countries like Japan. And what that allowed us to do is, so GPS will jump you from one repeater to the other. And the digital mode, if you go into D-Star, will carry your conversation on as you jump from tower to tower. So now I can put in the call sign. I had this laid out to me tremendously a long time ago by a trucker. So this trucker, he was retired. He had been trucking his entire life, and his son um, bought over his truck, his last truck, and started getting into trucking. Well, the two of them and this guy's wife all kept in touch around the entire United States by having ICOM handheld radios that had a GPS, and digital D-Star mode capabilities on the radio. They could literally punch in their call signs and be talking to each other wherever they pretty much were in the United States, because ICOM D-Star, their digital mode was super popular back in the day. So that was before cell phones really took off as well. So that was huge.
I did not know that existed at
I
all.
know, I know. It's this great kept secret that
Yep.
it's there. Now, let's compare and contrast real quick with Yaesu and DMR, Digital Mobile Radio. Yaesu System Fusion said, okay, instead of going super creative like ICOM did, all I want to do is replicate what Motorola did, but I want to do it in a little bit different way. Part of the channel is for voice, part of the channel is for data. I really don't care about having another voice channel in here. So it just did one voice channel and one data, so that when I went into digital mode on a digital channel, a Yaesu System Fusion channel, it would send my call sign, my name, and then probably my location if I had set it up. So that's all that System Fusion wanted to do. Um, DMR wanted to pretty much snub its nose at the rest of the internet and say, hey, we've got to standardize how we do this, guys, because we're all trying to solve for the same thing. And so DMR made a run at it. Unfortunately, it is incredibly difficult to program. And so a lot of people um, try to program it and get very frustrated with the process. And move on to something else. So
Yeah, that's too bad. Because
it
it
is.
like when you buy like a cell phone or a MacBook Pro or whatever, like you're not having to configure the IP stack on the device in order for it to configure or to
Right.
work with other devices. All you're doing is like selecting your SSID from a list and then putting in the passphrase.
Yes.
And then that's it. And then it does everything else for you in the back end because everything's been agreed upon and it's all
Right.
nice and easy to work with, right? It would be the equivalent of having to go in and like probably maybe even harder going in, configuring your IP address manually, setting your
Oh yeah.
DNS,
Oh
setting
yeah.
your gateway, your subnet and that kind of stuff, right? So,
Yeah. You and
um,
I know how to do that because we're
right.
we're
That's what
techs
we
and
do. We do
we're
it for a living.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's what we do.
Yeah.
But the average bear kind of goes above their head, and so
Yeah.
it gets to be
Yep.
that technical thing that you either got to learn it because you really want to do it, or
Yep.
you're like, I really just don't care, guys. Just let me hit the push to talk button and talk to somebody. That's all it comes down to. We'll bring you
Yeah.
back in here, Tyler.
I'm
Well,
back.
and that's that. Well,
Someone understands me.
Right, right. So, one thing that I want to skip to, which I hope you don't mind, Phil, we'll
no.
skip to that. What changes, if anything, do we need in a state of emergency? We just talked about all this digital stuff. Tyler, we're getting back to you. I just want to push the button and talk. That's all I
Hi.
want to
Hi
do.
there.
Exactly. Hi. uh, that is one of the reasons why we have radio to start with. That's why law enforcement relies on radios to this day, because they're instantaneous communication.
For
You know,
sure.
if you don't want to have a police officer going, crap, what was that speed dial? While he's in a shootout with, you know, bank robbers. It's
Yeah,
just
no
is not
kidding.
going to go very well. So we got to have that instant communication. In a state of emergency, we talked about radio etiquette yeah, at the beginning, the top of the hour. And if you are in a state of emergency and you have a Bofang and you have it programmed, please talk. Please talk. Hey, I'm in trouble. The roof came off my house. Is there anybody out there? The roads are smashed. We don't know where to go. Help.
Hmm.
Please get on the radio and say it. There will be a bunch of people probably scanning frequencies looking for you to see if we can help. The last hurricane that we had, that were there are still parts of the United States that are reeling from this hurricane. I was a part of an emergency group of ham radio operators listening for that. Um, the group is run by Salvation Army.
Oh,
I
no
had
kidding.
I had to look for that. Yeah. So the Salvation Army, and I'm just trying to find their their official name because I blanked on it. I'm sorry. Ah, goodness gracious.
It's gonna be something like the Radio Corps.
Literally, not even joking on that one. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that I have
Yeah, sorry.
misplaced that.
Sorry. Yeah, that
So
because I
anyway,
guess the concept of the radio over during an time of emergency is the assumption is because of its nature and the ability to speak at long distances without requiring a cell phone tower, for example, right? Like obviously, a repeater is going to increase your distance,
yes,
but
yes,
you can still get pretty good, like
yeah,
handheld to handheld radio distance if you need to communicate without having to rely on any external devices other than somebody else having an I can't talk an end unit to talk to, right? Like
yes,
somebody else with a radio,
yes.
and then they're battery operated typically for the smaller handheld ones. So,
Bingo.
yep, in theory, as long as it was pre-charged, or you
Right.
have some kind of like USB charging whatever, you could potentially charge that battery, right, without having power in the case of
Exactly.
a hurricane or flood or whatever, right?
Yes. And I found it. Sorry, it's Saturn.
Oh,
Salvation
that's cool.
Army Team Emergency Radio Network. Don't you love that one?
It's like one of the things where they started off, they're like, hey, I think we got an acronym here somewhere.
I know, right?
Nice.
Oh man. So, in the case of emergency, please transmit. There are people waiting to hear. It does not matter what you say, it does not matter what call sign you throw out. If you're in an emergency, do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about too with the repeaters though, like in the state of emergency, likelihood of those also being down probably pretty high.
Lower than you might think, actually.
Interesting.
So, just a quick rabbit hole on that. Um, a lot of repeaters in the United States are run by the Red Cross for
Oh wow.
emergency preparedness communications.
Huh.
This was instituted a very long time ago, Reagan Roosevelt era of, hey, is there a way where civilians could prepare better in case something happened? This was back in the time when we got done with a couple world wars. We were kind of looking at a Cold War for a while there with Russia. We weren't sure about nuclear stuff, so there was a lot done with radio communications. Well, the standards to run a repeater that's connected to the Red Cross are that the repeater has essentially 1 week of operation
Hmm.
time. So you usually have generators hooked up to it. You have, these things are located in basements up high. So if there's flooding, they're not going to flood. A lot of thought and energy was put into these repeaters that are associated with Red Cross stuff. Your ordinary repeater has a requirement of staying up for 72 hours. So even an ordinary repeater is going to be fairly capable, at least for shorter periods of time.
I I did not know this. Like
Yeah,
this is really great information because I always think of like what happens in the case of like a major emergency. Like it's great that you can communicate over radio. You get those longer distances, but I
yeah.
was like, oh, all the repeaters are going to be down, and it may be a handful, will still be up, but who knows if there's going to be one in your range?
Well,
Is
that's
there?
why
Go
that's
ahead.
why a lot of these repeaters are not just thrown up on people's houses, with those old school antenna, uh, the tri-beam antenna rails that go up for 50, 75 feet with a a TV antenna on the top of it. They're put in places where you can have redundant power, where they're up on a hill, so it's not as likely to flood. You have another radio tower, so you can kind of economy of scale, put a couple of antennas for several organizations up there. That kind of stuff is available.
Yeah, my neighbor across the street growing up had one of those like a tripole
Oh yeah.
setups. Interesting. Is there a way to tell, if a repeater is run by the American Red Cross?
Uh,
If I was going to pre-program my radio with repeaters that I would know have a better chance of being up, like, is there something that kind of gives them away?
they're all going to be ham radio repeaters, number
Correct. Yep.
one. Uh,
I'm looking at our county right now.
I don't think so. I do know that W8DC, the Grand Rapids club repeater, is associated with the Red Cross, but I don't know if there's an easy way to find that out. That's a
Okay.
good question.
There's one in our area, W8 USA. I wonder how they got that
Yes.
one. Who they had to pay to get that?
Some of
That one's
these
been spread
are nets too. So you have W8 IRL
in real
is
life.
interlinked repeater league.
Oh, okay.
I know. That covers the whole west side of the state. So there's W8 IRL in Grand Haven. There's one in Grand Rapids. There's one up in Traverse City, and they're all linked together.
Nice. So
So
this is really, really good information, especially that 72-hour thing, even just
yeah,
your average repeater. Didn't know that that was the case. So what I would do if I was a civilian and I was concerned if I lived, especially in an area that was prone to having natural disasters, I'm sure people are already thinking about this, but maybe that'd be a bad idea to, get a Baofeng or a radio of some sort, program it with Chirp, and then download all the repeaters in your area and just set them up. That way, if you needed to use them to make longer distance communication, you would have them instead of trying to figure out how the heck am I going to find a repeater when it's already there.
100%. I couldn't recommend that course of action anymore. I would also say a lot of people are reticent to get their licenses for whatever reason. Oh, if it's an emergency, I don't need it. I'll just hit the push talk and throw it out there. That's no problem. But what I say is, preparation. There's a reason why people are called preppers, is because they're trying to prepare for an emergency. So if you're trying to prepare, grab a Baofeng, throw some stuff on there, figure out how to program your VCR, and then listen. Just turn it on and listen. See if there's anything going on.
Yeah, I because I have my GMRS license, I found a GMRS repeater in the area, and I was just curious. I was like, I wonder if there's anybody talking on this thing. Every once in a while, like I would catch someone, I would leave my radio up and running throughout the day or whatever. But
Yep.
usually it was just the repeater itself giving the time.
Yes.
But
Yep.
at least I know it
Unfortunately.
worked. At least I could
Yeah.
receive, and I don't know if I could
Exactly.
transmit. So
Exactly.
you and I, Andrew, will have to do a GMRS test via repeater, see if we can reach each other from the radio.
There we go.
Probably not, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, okay, no, this is all fantastic information. I know we're kind of running just past the hour here, real quick, and I will touch very briefly on encryption, or I'll ask you to touch very briefly on encryption
Yes.
before we kind of start to wrap this episode up. First off, I want to hit on something that's kind of related to the concept of encryption and radio secrecy, that kind of stuff, is near and dear to some people because they don't want others listening in their conversations. Yes. In general, I would say that radio is typically set up that you just expect somebody's probably listening to you. And then along the lines of obfuscation and stuff, like radio's pretty easy to triangulate too. Is that accurate?
That is. Yes.
Okay. So if you're like a prepper planning on like defending your house against World War III and don't want somebody to find you, don't use your radio? Question mark.
Oh, great segue. Great segue. So let me start with encryption, and that'll move us very rapidly into can they find me?
Yeah.
So encryption is great. You can have encryption if you get a business grade license. And so, Phil, you and I have GMRS licenses. So that's about as fast as loosened as you can give it, because the definition of a family unit in the FCC is very loose. So if you wanted to grab a radio and throw it to Uncle Phil while you're on your hunting trip, that's great. Um, if you wanted to have a business license, that allows you to throw a radio, an encrypted radio, on your own frequencies that nobody else should be using, to anybody that you designate is within your business. And that can be as easy as the Old West style of, well, you're now a deputy. You've been deputized. And they hand you the
Nice.
silver star of a badge, right? Um, so that is that's encryption. You can get it. You can get a business license. It's probably going to cost you about $1,500. Um, you can you can get your own frequencies, and you can have encryption. That usually and typically requires you to bump into the Motorola class of radios.
Sounds
Um,
expensive.
it does, yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, Encryption is coming to the Bofang class of
What?
radios, but it isn't quite, AES
Yeah, that's
256
okay.
type encryption. It's more of like voice obfuscation encryption. So it it's there. It can be done. But let's segue into can they find me topic.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people come at this and look at it from a Ukrainian war perspective. We've finally seen videos come out where guys queue up on radios, and all of a sudden 5 minutes later a drone zips in and drops a grenade, and you're like, holy bananas, I did not realize that that was a thing in 2025. So it's waking a lot of people up. But I want to say this is an old thing. So back in the war in Afghanistan, you heard a lot about quote unquote ICOM chatter. So a lot of the army guys were like, "Oh yeah, we heard them talking on the ICOM and things like that." Well, there was a ICOM radio back in the day that could not only be a radio, but it was real good at being a scanner. So you have a bunch of Taliban using different frequencies, and this radio was a phenomenal little unit, and it could scan lots of the channels that were normally used very quickly. And so if someone queued up on a radio, the U.S. Army guys who, the radio men who had these ICOM units could hear what they're saying. And so if you have a translator right there, that became pretty invaluable. Um, so number one, we can still hear you, even though you're encrypted. It does, Tyler. I'm going to bring you back into this conversation. If you did look up those modem tones, that's kind of what it would sound like to
Huh.
have an encrypted radio. Um, However, let's talk about triangulation. Triangulation, like what we're seeing on the battlefield in Ukraine, is a very commonplace tactic used. Even third world countries practice triangulating signals.
Hmm.
So within the United States, within a civilian population, that's even become a sport, and it's called fox hunting in the
Of
United
course it
States.
is.
um, so what you need is you need three different antennas that can capture the signal, all feeding back to a very small device, usually a laptop, and that laptop's running a program, and that program can pretty much figure out the generality of where you're at. It can give you a compass bearing, and it can also give you a power factor, which will help you triangulate distance. So, what do we do for that? There are a couple things to do. So, if we're going old school on this, a lot of the rules of old school said don't transmit in the same place. So Number one rule of radio is keep it short and sweet. So here we go. We're going to throw it out. We're going to throw out the information and hope that the other party that we had out there listening to us knows where to listen to us and what to hear. And then if you have, if you're operational from a house, go to this hill, go to a different hill, get out in the streets, transmit while walking, um, get out and about, and then don't transmit from the same location, and definitely don't transmit from home. But the funny thing, and you guys are both going to laugh on this, I've had this question posed to me a lot. And that I always ask them. So, we can go over all these rules. You can, don't transmit from the same place. And I've had students and people say, okay, I didn't transmit from the same place. We tried this out and we did this. And I said, okay, but did you bring your cell phone with you?
Mm-hmm.
And they're always like, oh, doggone it.
That is funny.
So, don't bring your cell phone either.
Or put it into a Faraday bag.
Yes, exactly. So there are some things that you can do to not be found, but there is a technological way to also avoid being found. There is a specific kind of Motorola radio, and it transmits in the 900 megahertz band. This is neither VHF or UHF. This is neither FRS or GMRS, and it is not in the ham bands either. But this is
Oh
in the
wow.
900 megahertz. It's designated as scientific space. Um, that is also designated for communication. So anybody, no license whatsoever is necessary, can transmit in this 900 megahertz space. Now, if your mom and dad had an old portable phone back from the late 90s, this was using that 900 megahertz space. So sometimes someone pushed a garage door opener and the portable phone, Fred, stop pushing the garage door. You're messing up my phone. Somebody would yell at the other person because a lot of stuff used the 900 megahertz space. Well, Motorola, after the heyday of Moto Turbo, again, it's radios. Everybody wants radios. So now we're starting to see radios come into the personal or the business space. Um, J.C. Penney's, the folks at J.C. Penney's have radios, and you're like, what? Why do you need radios? But J.C.
Yeah,
Penney's,
check the price of the underwear
oh, exactly.
on floor 3.
Exactly. But J.C. Penney's is not going to pay for a radio license, a business radio license, in every single one of their stores across the whole United States. They're just not going to do that. So Motorola came out with these 900 megahertz space radios. But in order to combat the amount of stuff in this 900 megahertz radio space, they decided to do something that has a very technical term. It's called frequency hopping spread spectrum. Repeat after me. Frequency hopping spread spectrum. Very technical term. So when you queue up on your Bofang or your TID radio or your GMRS or your FRS radio, you are queuing up on a very specific frequency, one that you've probably worked pretty hard to program into that radio and make sure that it's right and that all the variables are good to go. With 900 megahertz, it operates from 902 megahertz to 928 megahertz. That is a massive amount of radio space. So instead of saying when I hit the push to talk, it's going to go on 903.125 megahertz. And that's where all my radio communications are going to be. When you push that push to talk, it's going to hop and bounce all over that frequency spectrum. So there's a mathematical uh, formula built into the radio to say hop all over this place like a drunken frog. Um, and then the other Motorola radios also have the same maths in those radios to be able to follow the drunken frog all over the road. Now, what this does for obfuscation, I'm surprised I got that word out this late at night, is you can't trace it because it pops like fireworks all over the spectrum. So you can't say, "Ooh, I hear something on this frequency and someone's talking code, so they're trying to be James Bond and I want to hear what they're saying because I want to know where they are." There's no way without incredibly complicated and expensive equipment to be able to go, hey, I want to listen in on this conversation, and then two, I want to figure out where it is. It is almost statistically and mathematically impossible, even if you know the math of how that conversation is flipped all around. Hopping like a drunk frog all over the road.
Yeah, because you'd have to get enough of a stream to be able to get that triangulation down, for example, right? And if it's just really brief,
Right.
then you're never going to get enough. Like maybe I guess if it hits that channel enough, but I feel like that's gonna, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
So
And correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah.
but in the
Oh,
900 megahertz range, you can also encrypt legally. Is that
also
accurate?
correct. Yes, you can. So on these Motorola radios, and here's the trick: these Motorola radios are not exactly cheap, but we're talking hundreds of dollars, couple $100, as opposed to your Bofang radio, which is $20, or your TID radio, which is maybe more like 70 or 80. Um, so they're expensive, but they're also a little tricky on the programming side. Um, but if you have the know-how of how to program it and you want to dig into this, that is an option to get a encrypted, untraceable option for radio. Full stop.
See, that's nice. And I know the distance is not going to be as nice as or as long as maybe some of the other radio options out there, right?
Yes.
But if you're in a small area, it'll
Yeah.
probably do you well enough. I
So
have no idea what the range is on something like that, but
it's about a mile.
that's pretty good. So
Yeah.
like better than FRS.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of civilian tactical teams are really starting to take a look at it because it's an option that doesn't require everybody in the team to get a ham radio license, and it may be a little bit more upfront of a cost, but gun guys know how to spend the money, especially when it comes to the
Yeah.
optics and and the NVGs and the thermals, and we know how to spend money, so that's not as much of a deterrent.
And if you are communicating with a group of individuals,
Indeed.
then you don't necessarily need to go beyond a mile if you guys are
Right.
close.
Right.
In like
Exactly.
a end of the world type scenario thing, which is what all guys think about all the time. Either that or the Roman Empire, one of the two.
I was going to say we probably think about it more than the Roman Empire, but
Probably, probably.
so
No, this is all. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to put in a plug here. I know I presented some technical stuff today, and I know I presented some things on the Motorola's that are trickier to do, but I just wanted to put a plug in for navcom.us. Use me as the easy button. I can walk you through it. I can help you with it. I could even provide the solution myself, because I have all the Motorola background and uh, all the sorts of stuff. So it's available and it's easier than you might think.
It's funny. I shouldn't have let you interrupt me, or I should have, I should have let myself interrupt you because I was going to ask you. I was going to say, hey, this has been a lot of great information over 2 episodes, and kind of what does Navcom do? You kind of hit on some of the resources for group communication, Motorola's, that kind of stuff. But anything else specifically that you'd like to hit on that your company does, that if somebody wanted to reach out to you to get more information, obviously you gave the website, but what other things that they may find your services of use for?
Oh, thanks so much for letting me talk about this and my passion here. So, the military has a phrase: shoot, move, and communicate. My passion is for the move and communicate part of that. So, my phrase that I love to use a lot is: how do you shoot, move, and communicate? A lot of us shoot really well with USPSA or hunting or all the different shooting stuff, but we do it very individually. So a lot of us are starting to get into that mindset. A lot of the civilian world is starting to get into the mindset, partially due to having the United States Navy SEALs being so vocal about what they do. And, a lot of us guys kind of idolize the SEALs, and they do some cool stuff. So how do they do it though? So the whole thing for Navcom is: how can I help you communicate with other people, and then how can you move to them? If the grid goes down, if the world ends, if you're trying to move tactically out in the woods, touching dirt, as they say, and you don't want to do it with the cell phone, how do you do it without Google Maps? So the entirety of Navcom is to just help you answer the question: how can I help you communicate? How can I help you get from point A to point B with GPS or ATAC? Um, can I help set you up with a Bowfang? Can I teach you a class on the Bowfangs? If that's where you want to start. If you're in the middle and you're like, man, I'm done with these Bowfangs, I'm ready to upgrade. Great. Do you want encrypted? Do you want 900 megahertz? you know Help you evolve along that process as well. So that's why I set up Navcom. That's what I do for Navcom. Use me as the easy button for move and communicate.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. 'Cause there's not a lot of that out there, right? Because again, there's like we've talked about at like the start of all these episodes, there's a lot of people who want to know enough about this to be dangerous, for lack of a better term. Not like
Yeah.
actually, maybe actually dangerous, but like, um, but they don't necessarily know where to start, right?
Yeah.
And again, to your
100%.
point about being individualistic when we do a lot of our training or shooting, or we're happening for shooting USPSA, Tyler's either in the same bay with me hanging out, or Andrew's in the bay next to me. I can go walk over and talk to him.
Right.
But what happens when that's not possible and you still need to talk over a short period of time? So I appreciate that. That's kind of we talk about acceptable accuracy being our passion project. It sounds like Navcom is your passion project.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything in your knowledge. You've been extremely insightful. And it was like Tyler and I talked about after the last episode. Tyler, what did you say about Andrew? I don't want to steal your thunder about the way that he goes about not like transferring knowledge to other people.
Yeah, no, this is something that I did mention in the previous episode, how Andrew's just a fantastic storyteller, how he's able to, of course, for me, a lot of this information flew right over my head because I am just not knowledgeable in this space. And I know both of you guys, even with you understanding the radio side, like this is something I know you are far more researched than I am, Philip. So And of
Could
course, I
get
know you are an
bad.
IT professional as well, so you already understand that's like the digital side of things. And I'm just like, I don't know. I just press the button, I talk, which unironically, that's kind of how I am with guns too. Like there are times like you and I will talk about guns. I'm like, I just know how to shoot. I
Very
shoot
true.
fast. That's great. I move fast. So,
Well, therein lies the philosophy, Tyler, of, there are a lot of us who can dive into the speeds and feeds about stuff like Phil and I, and we just geek out about it. But along your lines as well, you go to the reputable spots to go, you know what? You make a good gun. I'm going to get this gun. It's going to be kind of the one gun that I have, and we're going to rock and roll with this.
that is true.
And I'm here for speeds and feeds, or if you need the easy button for communications, let's do it.
That's
That's actually a
awesome.
good call out too, and we'll kind of wrap on that with this specific topic. But again, to Tyler's methodology, he's very much of like, I want to get a gun. I know it's going to work really well, and there's plenty of resources out there. And Tyler used those resources. Warrior Poet, please sponsor us.
I would
To
gladly take
purchase
that sponsorship.
the Shadow Systems War Poet, right?
Yep.
Like
Right.
it's a voice that you trust. And I guess Andrew could be the same thing for you for radio, saying, hey, I know I want to do this thing. And
Hmm.
yes, we talked about a lot of complex subjects tonight. I want to know how to use those to my advantage without having to get super in depth. Like set me up, set my squad up, my friends up. I've got enough money to buy 10 radios and hand them out, and then they can press
Yep.
to talk, right? But I want to get those
Yep.
things like obfuscation, encryption, long distance, all of those things that I know exist, but I don't necessarily know how to do it. So
Bingo.
Yeah.
Andrew's going to be that resource for you.
Oh
Hmm.
yeah.
So
Exactly.
with
Well,
that, go ahead, Tyler.
I was gonna say because it really goes right back to recommendations, just who you know. Because
Right.
I even look at a lot. I'll joke with my coworkers sometimes. Like I'll recommend if people ask me like about a book or something, and I just tell them like honestly, I recommend authors. I don't really recommend books anymore. There are some books that I very much recommend, but a lot of times I'll just go based off of authors and kind of go from there because these are trusted resources, people that have a track record of they have that pattern that I already trust or they've been recommended by somebody else. So that's really about it in that case. So what are you about to say, Philip?
Oh, I was just going to ask you for what your advice was for today.
Yeah, so when it comes for my life advice, this is actually something that came up in our staff meeting today. How there is a difference between pleasure and enjoyment. So when it
Hmm.
comes to pleasure, that is something that is more of like it's fleeting. It's something that is typically more of a, I guess, lack of better terms, more of a hedonistic type of feeling that is more for self interest that can hurt others, or it happens in by yourself. Whereas enjoyment is something that is more something that is lasting, that deals with fond memories with others. So, of course, pleasure is okay. Like I think of social media, but doom scrolling for like 30 minutes to an hour, 2 hours, you don't look back and say, man, I had such a great time scrolling through social media for 3 hours versus, man, I just had a couple hours just hanging out with the dudes or with my family or with my friends, right? So you don't look back. So that's where it's just making sure that you're prioritizing your time well and spending time and making sure that it's okay. Of course, I'm not saying don't go on social media. I don't play games. That's all fun. That's fine. But just make sure you know how you're prioritizing your time and you're choosing enjoyment over pleasure.
Can I share something that's going to come off as funny at first, but actually kind of an interesting insight that I had about Chick-fil-A
Yeah, go for it, man.
and how they
Do it.
always say like my pleasure.
Hmm.
And I always thought that was such a weird statement.
Yeah.
In like the way that like, I know they're not getting any pleasure out of like serving me. Like it's just this thing that they say, but it seems like maybe they should say my enjoyment, you know?
Hmm.
Like I'm here to serve. Like it kind of drives me crazy, and I understand that's like their thing, and having it be a little bit off and a little odd and weird is probably why it's become such a cultural like
Oh, for
you know
sure. Well,
thing, right?
it's
But
like their trademark.
right,
It's their
exactly.
branding now, essentially. I
But
mean,
yeah,
the
no,
fact that Chick-fil-A is able to train high schoolers to be like that respectful, that well work, like
yes,
you gotta real like.
it,
Yes, it's a little
it is the
quirky, but
only.
yeah.
I'll say it's the only fast food restaurant I'll let my daughter work at,
Oh, for sure.
because they'll teach you how to work and how to properly like work in an environment around other people where you are getting paid to give customer service.
Yes.
And a lot of us, like fast food restaurants and restaurants in general, sometimes forget that. So
Hmm.
yeah, no, it's a
100%.
I
it's a good
remember
call
I
out.
was doing some. It was like an online church seminar. I was training, like a leadership seminar, and it was a Chick-fil-A executive who's retired now, and something that really stuck with me that she taught was the fish stinks from the head down, as how it's that
Mm-hmm.
same idea of everything
Ooh.
rises and falls with leadership. So if you
Yep.
have bad leadership, it's just gonna go right down and affect everybody else. So that's really kind of stuck with me. Speaking of that vein of Chick-fil-A, so because it's true. Like
Yeah.
I know you and I have spoken about this.
Yep.
Typically, people don't leave bad workplaces; they leave bad managers.
Right.
Yes. Yes. Ooh,
It's
good one.
interesting you bring the top down thing, and obviously Chick-fil-A does a really good job of like finding out who the like person is that's going to hold that like franchise in the area, right? They're really careful with that kind of stuff.
Oh,
And
one
I was at
hundred
another
percent.
store who I will not name, but it's another store that has very high standards when it comes to quality and customer service. And we were there and we were talking to the store manager. And again, because I don't want to say this because I don't want to get him in trouble. And it's not only going to get him in trouble, but it's just one like the stores in places that matter. And I think even McDonald's used to do this back in the day, but like somebody from corporate will show up and they'll get a score based on how your store is set up, how clean it is, how the employees act,
Hmm.
how that kind of stuff. They'll get a score, and that score will directly impact the way that, like, whether or not that management will remain, right? So I think a lot of that's kind of forgotten, and some people look at it like, oh my gosh, corporate was in today, and I got nicked for this small tiny thing. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
and in the end, it probably didn't impact you because you're doing everything else right. But like, there's a reason why they'll like nick you for getting a small thing wrong because everything else is so important,
Hmm.
right? And then again, you're dealing with retail workers, and it's trying to get them from being like typically a college job or a high school job or whatever up into the workforce. And really, Chick-fil-A is doing us a service
Yeah, no kidding. So, what
by
would you
preparing
fill?
workers for the next generation. Oh, I knew you were going to ask me next. Dang it.
100%. Because last time I
Okay,
called
so
on Andrew, so you're next now.
yep, that's fair. So, my kids are doing a sugar-free Lent. I have chosen to do something else. I'm actively running, but there's some ulterior motive behind that too. And we were out tonight at a event where there was like your normal food, and like Ryan, my son, he can eat like normal food. He's chosen not to eat sugar. This is all his choice. And the kids at the table were taunting him with all the desserts that they had, and it was probably not as serious as he thinks it was, but because it's already like a struggle to not eat sugar over this time period,
Hmm.
any tiny little bit of somebody taunting you, even just a little bit, saying, "Oh, you want some, Ryan?" Even a little bit of that, is going to be really difficult to work with. And he was
For
very
sure.
upset about that. He was like, I knew I shouldn't have come tonight because I knew they were going to taunt me with the sugar and stuff like that. And then my wife, actually, of all people, was like, when you have times like that, it's not supposed to be easy. And those are going to be
Exactly.
the hard times that you have to do to get through to get your end goal of not having sugar for that period, right? And not that we're trying to go into situations where he's kind of constantly be tempted, but it's that those temptations, even if it's in just a short period of time, they're going to help you grow as a person and help you to be able to give up things like that, right? Or to realize that you can give up things that are destructive to you,
Hmm.
right? So, and then my wife actually asked, and I thought this was really insightful on her point, and then my son's response was really good too. She was like, "Did you pray about it?" And I was like, huh. Like I wouldn't even thought about that necessarily. And it makes me feel like a bad human being or Christian for not thinking about it. But like, and he was like the other day, he's like, I did because I was really struggling with this. And I was like,
Hmm.
huh. And I think just having that conversation, like in praying will kind of help you get through it.
For sure.
So
Well,
I
I
don't
mean,
know. It was
because
100%. I
you even
love
look
that.
at Yeah, it's funny because when you're chatting, my brain was kind of going towards like, I guess I have two comments on that. The first comment I was thinking was how that's a perfect example for your son to learn that he is not responsible for like other people's
Right.
decisions. Like
Yep.
what they're choosing is what they're choosing. Is it wrong? Yeah, but of course it is. Or I mean, it depends on perspective. But either way, like, but he's in control of of his behavior, his
Right.
actions, his feelings. And then two, of course, they brought up the praying. I'm like, well, yeah, that's true. Of course, me as a pastor, I'm like, oh, duh, because I don't. So Lent is not something that I personally practice, but I do know that it's a great thing because it's on kind of the same vein of fasting. Because the whole purpose of fasting is you're saying no to your physical desires of your needs, especially in the context of food. Like you're saying no to the greatest need of your body, other than of course air and water, to this way. Now you're saying no to your flesh so you can say yes to your spirit, to your soul. So it's like, yeah, so you pray so you can refocus on that higher thing. So, but all right, those are my comments. Anything else, Philip?
That's all I got. Now it's Andrew's turn
Yes, it is.
to give us some fatherly advice.
My dad advice is something that I'm living out, and I've chosen it for my entire 40s decade. Um, do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
Do
Yeah.
hard things in your personal, in your professional, spiritual lives. It forces you to reprioritize life around what you should want from God. It focuses your body around what it should be doing instead of the IT lifestyle that Phil and I are pretty in tune with.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it focuses your spiritual life around God. Is we talk about Lent as this time of year, and I'm Catholic, so that's a big thing for us crazy Catholics over here is
Hmm.
Lent. And so, you said uh, give up of the flesh in order to benefit the spirit.
Hmm.
Phenomenal way of doing that. But I think it applies to the entire life perspective of do hard things. Um, Aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort.
Hmm.
And when you think about it that way, and I'll say that again, aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. And as I'm aging and as I'm getting older, am I becoming more of a couch potato that cracks the beers and watches the game and doesn't really think about spiritually oriented things or physically oriented things? But I found that through this do hard things, um, you know, simple 3 words, it's forced, I viewed it originally as the physical perspective. Do hard things, get out there, flip tires, do the Wolverine 5K, that kind of stuff. And what it morphed into, which is such a philosophy of life that forces you to become a better husband, better parent, because you want to attack the hard things. You know, for me, it's how do I be a better parent to my kids? Not that I was a terrible one before, but we get lazy as well, and we get stuck in ruts in our lives, and you're like, okay, I got to break out of this rut, or I just gotta level it up. I gotta eat the mushroom with the Mario. And yes, my 12-year-old's playing Mario right now, so that's where that's coming from. Um, but you just gotta keep leveling yourself up. You gotta continue pursuing those things, because if you're not, you're you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So I found that really interesting what you were saying about how as we get older, we do seek more comfort, right? I think that's a result of when you're younger, you are inherently going through typically things that are very challenging. I think of back from when I was in my 20s, being really broke, right? Having no money. So you're
Yes.
constantly battling against that, right? Like you're doing hard things. Like you have no choice. You're going to
Yeah.
do those hard things and grow up, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, you can go back to like school, but then like I think of like, having no money, being broke when you're first, and then, or finding a mate, right? That's not easy. It's hard,
Yeah.
right? And then getting married is, it's expensive and it's hard. The first years of marriage is hard,
Yeah.
and then getting that like started in your career is really hard, right? All these things are hard and you're doing all this hard stuff. And you're all this whole time, you're like, man, if I could just get to the point where I don't have to deal with this anymore, if I could just get to my point in my career where, like I am making enough money to make it by, right? If I could just get into a home. Well, for you and I, Andrew, we get to the point now where we have built up enough, either financially, like with a family, I guess even, spiritually, we're always working on that, right? But I'm thinking more of like the physical worldly realm.
Yeah.
We've gotten past a lot. We still do a lot of hard stuff, and having kids is very hard, and dealing with that.
Yep.
But we tend to neglect ourselves once we've kind of gotten to that point, like I said, when things get a little bit easier. And there are still hard things, but then it's really important to focus on our families, obviously, and then to make sure that we're also not neglecting ourselves spiritually and physically as well. I
Yes.
really like the spiritual concept where you brought up, because a lot of times I think of like doing hard things, like you said earlier, about doing physically hard things. And my last thought on that, and I'll kick it over to you, Tyler. My last thought on that was from there are tricks that you can do in your brain to force you to do hard things. If you can associate, and eventually you'll get into a mindset where you don't have to do that anymore. And I'm not perfect at this, but like for me right now, my whole thing is, and then Tyler knows this, I've started running or jogging because I'm old, for the Badger Trekker later this year, right?
Yeah.
And I know I want to do well in that. And that is my outcome, right? And so having like saying, all right, in order to do that, I got to run at least 3 days a week and work on getting up to the point where I can run like a full 5K in additional weight and do okay with it, right? In order to be able to do well in that specific task. That's great. That's a physical goal that I have for. And then now I'm starting to think of like, I should really find a spiritual goal. So I appreciate that, Andrew. And that's going to be a takeaway for me tonight. When I get done and we get done recording here, I'm going to go ahead and start looking into that.
I love it. 'Tis the
That's
season.
awesome.
So thank you. And Tyler, I interrupted you, but I was so excited. I just
No, you're
was
good.
going to
That's
keep going.
awesome. No, I love that thought for sure. I like to add on to that, to both of what you guys just said. Of course, it's something that I like to call the silent burden of being a man. And of course,
Mm.
as you grow, as you get older and progress, I I was kind of thinking about it, why is that? Like, why is it as you grow and progress, like you kind of tend to focus a little less on yourself? And I think it's because with in life, we are ultimately responsible for ourselves, right? And we're responsible to other people, but as men, you are responsible for yourself, for your spouse, and for your children. Because of that, as you grow, now you're having to be responsible for that. It's a little harder for you to have even the bandwidth really to focus on yourself. Of course, for me, I'm an unmarried guy with no kids, so it's really easy for myself to take care of myself, focus on my fitness goals, my physical, my gun stuff, my spiritual. I mean, I have a girlfriend now, so of course ten my focus is shifting a little bit, but even now, like, I'm responsible to her, but I'm not responsible for her until I get married,
Well,
right?
and then I'd just like to add this on there too, as you're trying to find that mate, which Phil, you said it's a hard thing to do,
Oh yeah.
um, especially in today's day and age as well. I quake in my boots for my kids when
Yeah.
they get to that
Uh-huh.
age. But, when when we're in that phase of attracting a spouse, what none of us think about, and I'm hitting this later in life as well, is, you know, that spouse is attracted to you for who you are. And as we get older and we pursue that comfort, which for a lot of guys becomes sitting on the couch watching the game with a beer, you morph into this person who's maybe less physical because the back hurts, and you have all of these life factors pushing you and molding you into a different human being than what you were when you originally got married. And
Hmm.
some of the stuff that attracts your spouse to you, and you to your spouse, that stuff kind of fades away after time, and you got to do hard things, and you got to work on that again, maybe
Hmm.
not to get back to that same spot, but you got to work on how that might have changed. You got to work on your communications as to, hey, I'm here on the couch because the back hurts and I'm tired and I was up with the kids, or, wherever that might lead. Or, you're right. I haven't gone for a run in a long time. I should get back on that bandwagon.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting because it's crazy. I mean, Phil, you actually know these two people as well, but I know of two men in my life who are in their 70s who I would argue are in better shape than I am. One of them
Oh, man.
still, one can still do roofing, plumbing, electrical, drywall, paint, like just
Those guys are my
handyman.
heroes.
It's insane. It's like, of course, we'll say like I know he kind of messed up his shoulder a couple years ago, so he's. I remember years like he was. I consider I'm a power lifter. Like I do, or rather, I do powerlifting style of lifting. Like I've hit crazy numbers, like 500-pound deadlift, 360
Woo.
or 355 bench, 475 squat, and this
Wow.
guy's like exact yeah, but and like this guy is like we're lifting this big old platform. This I can't do those numbers anymore. Just saying, but
Yeah.
all that to say, like we're like lifting this big old platform, and I'm like I'm struggling to pick it up. And he's like, "What are you doing?" At the time, the dude was like in his mid 60s, but still like mid to late
Sure.
60s. But I'm like, "What the heck?" I'm like, "What?" It's kind of like that
Yeah.
practical strength versus like the gym strength. And another guy, he
Yes.
just literally plays pickleball every day, and he's in much better cardiovascular. He'll be. It's actually almost annoying how much better shape he is than I am. But at the same time, because he chose to do that, he chose to do
Right.
hard things, to push forward, and to be the healthy man that he is in his 70s.
Right. Right. He did hard things in his 50s and 60s to get through the pain, to get
Hmm.
through whatever life events throw at you, to become that 70-year-old who's still like, I'm going to kick it at life.
Yeah, exactly.
Love
But
it.
cool. Well, thank you everyone for listening to another exciting episode of Acceptable Accuracy. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bell. And that's all I've got. Do you have anything to add to that, Phil?
I'm just going to thank Andrew again for his time over these past couple episodes of sharing his knowledge with both us and our acceptable accuracy listeners. And I'm guarantee we'll have him back again for another communications related episode. So, Andrew, again, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys. I sure appreciated talking with you guys.
Oh, cool. Well,
Awesome. With that, we'll see you guys next week or 2 weeks or whenever you want to listen to us next.
we'll see you in the next episode.
What he said.